Hello and welcome. Finding an interview with Steve Ditko is a rarity. Ditko notoriously declined any and all interviews and invitations to attend comic conventions. In part, his choice not to lead a public life was based on his philosophical views, whereby the work spoke for itself. On the surface, he maintained a distant, silent presence, which is, in my opinion, often misunderstood and misinterpreted due to a lack of information. Contributing to this silent, private equation may be Ditko's own experience at a convention and with interviewers. It is not well known, but Ditko did attend one convention in 1964. It was an experience that did not impress him, and he found the entire time an ordeal. He seemed to find fans both disrespectful and entitled. These are values he would apply to interviewers as well. His obscure comic work implies Ditko disliked it when interviewers acted like he was obligated to answer their questions. This was discourteous. Furthermore, he preferred to respond in writing rather than sitting face to face and being expected to respond immediately. Ditko equally disliked that articles about the industry seemed to accept everything at face value. That is, if someone made a claim, like they created Spider-Man for example, no one would question it or investigate the claim's validity. Unfortunately, he would decline interviews where his perspective could be represented. Although, Ditko did write corrections to articles appearing in fan magazines, but those were rather brief, specific, and sporadic. As another contradiction, Ditko was known to answer letters, speak to those that appeared at his office, and he had telephone conversations with those that called. Certainly, some of those interactions were brief, and sometimes Ditko was a little terse or abrupt. That said, if he was interrupted while working, one can understand why he might be a bit annoyed. Or if someone asked for the millionth time about Spider-Man, he might respond with something brief and dismissive. I don't want to bury the lead, as the saying goes. It has to be reiterated that Ditko's letter writing was extensive. He responded to unknown thousands of letters during his life. Finally, there is his reputation as being a recluse, which is not exactly an accurate term, because it implies he hid in his studio and avoided human contact. This is not even close to being true. Along with politely interacting with fans and the occasional journalist at his studio, there are many anecdotes of him visiting Marvel, DC, Charlton, and Valiant and having casual conversations with other industry professionals. Certainly, he seems to have preferred working over socializing, but considering he had rent to pay and he wasn't getting numerous mainstream gigs, that work ethic makes sense. All of this contributes to the enigma of Steve Ditko. It seems impenetrable and loaded with misinformation, which is then repeated and stripped of nuance. Or, to quote the movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. Or, if you're a middle-aged killjoy, you investigate the legend. In 1968, Ditko was interviewed. When articles reference the fact that he hadn't been formally interviewed since the 60s, this is the interview they mean. Unlike a typical interview, it appears that he responded to questions in writing rather than in person. It was published in Marvel Main No. 4 and then reposted online a number of years later. The interview contained 20 questions from a number of people. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to recite the question, not the person who submitted it. I'm also editing out the brief introduction, and I've slightly edited some text for clarity. Otherwise, this is the interview as it appeared in 1968. Let's get into it. Question. Your last 2 or 3 strips, The Question, Mr. A, and The Creeper, have all dealt with reporters and mobster type of crime. Is this a personal crusade of yours? Ditko responds. Reporters have an easier, more natural way of getting involved with all types of crime. They are not restricted with set routines or limited in their scope of activities. I prefer conflicts that are based on reality rather than based on fantasy. When you get wound up with supervillains, super fantastic gadgets, and super incredible action, everything has to be made so deliberately that it all becomes senseless. It boils down to what you want a story to stand for. Question. During your years at Marvel, you were only depicted once, and that time by your own hand, whereas you were left out of bullpen photos in the Merry Marvel Marching Society record. Was this your choice? Ditko responds, yes. Question. In the 1967 Comics Awards poll, you usurped such greats as Kirby, Wood, Frazetta, and Williamson, by a substantial margin too. How do you feel about this, and how do you think it happened? Ditko responds, "This is the first time I've heard of the poll, but I don't feel anything in particular because it doesn't affect me in any way. A poll only means that X number of people prefer one to another. It doesn't make one a better artist. Good art or anything cannot be decided by a poll, popularity, or likes and dislikes. A preference is not a standard for what is good or right. Everything has to be measured with a clearly defined, appropriate standard. People's likes or dislikes or preferences may change, but it can't affect a proper standard that remains unaltered. I don't know why each person voted the way he did." Question: Did anyone or anything particularly influence your style? Ditko responds, "The biggest thing influencing my style would be that I see things in a certain way, and that means handling everything so that a personal point of view comes across." Question: When did you break into comics, and who did you first work for? Ditko responds, "In 1953, a very small publishing company. I don't even remember the company's name." Question: Out of all the characters that you have created, which is the best extension of your thoughts and beliefs? Why? Ditko responds, "The Question and Mr. A. I can't seem to separate the two. Why? They are positive characters, not negative. They stand for something. They know what they stand for and why they must make that stand. They are not just against something. Every criminal in the world is opposed to being robbed or murdered, but do these criminals stand for justice? Being against something isn't enough. Every person, whether he wants to be or not, is in a continuous struggle. It's not a physical life or death struggle, yet it's a threat to every man's survival. No man has to battle or fear the supernatural. It doesn't exist. No man has to fight or fear creatures from outer space. No man has to battle foreign armies. The country's armed forces are prepared for that possibility. A man's battle isn't against foreign conspiracies. The FBI and CIA are set up and equipped to deal with that threat. The police are equipped to deal with crime. Health problems are battled by the medical profession. Against any of the above dangers, no man has to face them alone. But in that one continuous struggle, man has to constantly face the danger alone. No one can face it or fight it for him. It is the struggle for his mind. It is the struggle against everyone he comes in contact with. It is a struggle to keep his mind from being corrupted and being ruled by irrational premises. A man is what he stands for. In the struggle, a man can lose only if he gives in, defeated by self-destruction, by accepting the wrong as right to act against himself. Honest men, like dishonest men, are made. The honest refuse to accept wrong as right. The dishonest refuse to accept right as right. Each deliberately makes a choice. The struggle is not openly recognized. Accepting lies, dishonesty, etc., or practicing evasions are not criminal acts. Nothing but a man's own mind can protect him from accepting and practicing the irrational and suffering from its corrupting effects. But a man has to choose to do it. This is the premise that The Question and Mr. A are based on. Evil is powerless. A mind that refuses to accept or defend the truth by that act permits lies to exist, to give them respectability and influence, thereby undercutting and eventually destroying everything that is of real value. Destroyed not by the power of evil, but by good's refusal to protect itself against an enemy that could only exist with good's permission. A man's refusal to understand the issue changes nothing. If a man doesn't know why a thing is right or wrong, he has no defenses. He's vulnerable. He has no standard by which to measure, accept, or reject any proposition. The Question and Mr. A are men who choose to know what is right and act accordingly at all times. Everyone should. Question: Did any particular comic you've done cramp your style? Ditko responds, "Style is not what you do, but how you handle it. I could be cramped by a subject in doing, say, a World War II story, whereas, in a science fiction tale, whatever I draw doesn't have to look like anything that ever existed." Question: You referred to around fandom as Steve Ditko, man of mystery. Can you explain why there's a shroud of mystery surrounding yourself? Was this intentional, or did it just happen? Ditko responds, "It just happens because I'm a cartoonist in the comic book business, not a performer or personality in show business." When I do a job, it's not my personality that I'm offering the readers, but my artwork. It's not what I'm like that counts. It's what I did and how well it was done. I produce a product, a comic art story. Steve Ditko is the brand name. I make no mystery of what I do, and where I can properly explain why I do what I do, like in this fanzine, I'll do it. If a person knows the what and whys, he knows all about the who that is important to know. Question: what strip do you enjoy doing the most? Ditko responds: The Question and Mr. A. Question: most of us are well acquainted with your fantasy stories. Did you write them yourself? Did you enjoy doing them? Ditko responds: I wish you had listed some specific ones so that I'd know exactly what to comment on. Question: what strip was the easiest you ever did? What was the hardest? Ditko responds: no strip is easy for me to do because I draw for a tough critic, me. I have to do what I think is right, and that has to be done in a way that excites me, so it's hard to settle for something that would be easy to do. I believe in telling a picture story that is, 1, the panels have to be clear, I have to show what's going on, and 2, they have to be interesting. I don't believe in boring myself while I draw. The hardest to draw were The Question and Mr. A, because before I drew a line, I had to make them positive characters, to know what they stood for and why it's right to make that stand, and to have solid reasons so I could prove their position and actions if I was ever challenged. They had to be a man, a hero in the honest use of the word. Strength is not because of superpowers, but strength of acting on proper principles. Not a contrived strength of muscle, but a strength of right knowledge. No innocent person can suffer or be abused or penalized because of what The Question and Mr. A stand for. I'm not a professional writer, so it's difficult to be properly objective about the writing and to spot and correct mistakes. It's easier to write or handle fantasy than to put forth a new stand that has to be clearly defined and constantly followed in everything that is said and done. It demands logical progression in thought and deed, deliberately ignored in most comic stories. Most of the art had to be deliberately underplayed. The panel scenes had to be interesting, but not overly dramatic. The major conflict was a clash of right and wrong. The biggest threat and danger was not physical, but the destructive effects of spreading and accepting lies, of minds run by irrationality by choice or default. Over-dramatized art would have undercut the conflict. Question: who, beside yourself, did the best job of inking your pencils? Ditko responds: I couldn't say without listing all the others, and listing the whys and why nots. Question: why did you quit Creepy and Eerie? Will you ever contribute again? Ditko responds: I don't know the full story of what went on at Warren, so I can't comment on it. As for the future, I don't know that either. Hi, Alan here. Just for clarity, the question implies Ditko chose to stop working for Warren Publishing. This is not the case. In 1968 or thereabouts, Warren almost went bankrupt, so they stopped taking new work, which is what Ditko is alluding to in his response. End of insert. Question: art-wise, do you prefer the regular comics or the Warren line, where you can do washes? Ditko responds: I like them both. I even like to do stories in just pen and ink, without color or wash. All stories are not suited for wash, but those that have the right element and mood are hard to beat in that medium. Question: did you plot the stories you did for Warren? Ditko responds: no, I worked from a script. Question: besides yourself, who do you regard as the 5 best artists in comics? Ditko responds: that question is too difficult to answer and be fair. You have to set up and give a standard on how to judge the artist, and there are far too many factors to be considered, and they don't fit every artist the same way. Artists fall into too many categories. Some are pencilers, some are inkers, some do both. Some artists specialize in the type of story they do. Some types demand more or less imagination or draftsmanship, and the artist has to be judged accordingly. The artist has to be separated from the popularity of the strip. He can only be judged by his artwork, and that has to be broken down into storytelling, draftsmanship, composition, imagination, rendering, etc. Some artists are good in some phases, poor in others. You have to weigh the separate parts with the total effect, then try to separate the art from the effects or appeal of coloring. So it's much simpler for anyone to pick his own favorites, the ones that give him the most enjoyment, and let the serious art critics struggle with the burden of deciding who is the better artist. Question: what inspired the new Blue Beetle? Why do you think it didn't sell? Ditko responds: I was looking over the first Blue Beetle that Charlton Press put out, and it was terrible. I began thinking how it could have been handled. The ideas I had were good, so I marked them down, made sketches of the costume, gadgets, the bug, etc. I put them in an idea folder I have, and forgot about it. A year or so later, when Charlton was planning to do superheroes, I told Dick Giordano about the Blue Beetle idea I had. He was interested in trying it, so it came out of the idea file and into the magazine. I think it would be more interesting and revealing to ask comic readers why they didn't buy it. Question: are there any plans to revive Blue Beetle and the Question, and will you do them? Ditko responds: only Charlton Press can answer that. Question: there's a strong similarity between the Question and Mr. A. Is this intentional? Why? Ditko responds: I had been thinking about a type of character that would be different, or that would be a step ahead of what was being done, ever since the early Spider-Man days. The kind I decided on was the Mr. A type. When Blue Beetle got his own magazine, they needed a companion feature for it. I didn't want to do Mr. A because I didn't think the Comics Code would let me do the type of stories I wanted to do. So I worked up the Question, using the basic idea of a man who was motivated by basic black and white principles. Where other heroes' powers are based on some accidental super element, the Question and Mr. A's power is deliberately knowing what's right and acting accordingly. But it is one of choice, of choosing to know what is right and choosing to act on that knowledge in all his thoughts and actions. No conflict or contradiction in his behavior in either identity. He isn't afraid to know or refuse to act on what is right, no matter what the situation he finds himself in. Where other heroes chose to be self-made neurotics, the Question and Mr. A chose to be psychologically and intellectually healthy. It's a choice everyone has to make. Question: would you give us some personal data? Age, marital status, children, etc. Ditko responds: it's like you said, a man of mystery. There are a number of observations one can make from this interview. Ditko didn't respond well to open-ended questions. Where most people would take the opportunity to elaborate, he did not. He was direct and precise in his responses. The exception being his answer to the character he identified with. He spent a lot of time explaining how and why he believed Mr. A and the Question exemplified the characteristics he admired. And when the opportunity arose, he had no problem inserting those characters into his response and explaining why they were relevant and important. Which makes sense. It was the direction he wanted to take his career. They were also reasonably new characters, so it's no surprise he was enthusiastic about them. The overwhelmingly consistent point is Ditko's reluctance to disclose any private details. Not just about his marital status and such, but his actual opinion about the comic industry. When asked about the artists he thought were good, he basically said he couldn't answer because there were too many factors to consider. The same applies to questions about Warren and Charlton, where he avoided any speculation concerning either company. In other words, along with personal details, his opinions or observations were also private. To this point, Ditko maintained a hard separation between himself and the work he produced. As noted much earlier, this was due in part to his adherence to the objectivism movement. He did the work and let it speak for itself. In my opinion, this separation was mostly due to him being a private person. For whatever reason, he was not comfortable discussing himself, nor did he think those details were relevant to the work he produced. Conveniently, objectivism became the reason he avoided the spotlight. Admittedly, this is speculation, and in part, it's game recognizing game. Like Ditko, I'm also a private person and reveal very little about myself. All you need to know is present in the work I discuss. But enough about me. I'm already getting bored with inserting myself. In the end, this interview is an interesting snapshot of Ditko. Despite Spider-Man being highly successful, and that success ensured he got further mainstream work, he never mentions the character once. Nor does he spontaneously mention the Creeper or Hawk and Dove, or any specific piece he's proud of producing. He was more interested in looking forward and exploring what he could do next, rather than coasting on his prior accomplishments. In the comics industry, Ditko was the most well-known outsider artist. He was an enigma, wrapped inside a friendly but intense personality. That said, Ditko's prolific body of work ensures there's a legacy attached to his name. And ultimately, his quiet existence allowed others to project their own interpretations onto his work and his life. Thank you for watching. Thanks to all my fine supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Your ongoing support makes it possible for this channel to continue. I appreciate every single one of you. Please subscribe if you've not already. Leave a comment and a like. I try to keep ads and self-promotional bits like this to a minimum, so if you can, consider directly supporting this channel on Patreon. Extra special thanks to Green Man, Eidolon, Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sicken, Francis De La Cruz, Russell Bull, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrew, Corey Drew, Brian Deaton, Tom Granis, John Gaunt, James Graham, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient.